My name was André Lefebvre. In 1914, when the war began, I was only 19 years old. A country boy from the Champagne region. The smell of the farm soil, the smell of grapes, the smell of fresh bread from my mother's oven. This was my whole world. I loved the simplicity of life. I was going to marry Marie. Marie with golden hair and eyes as blue as the summer sky. I imagined our future on a small farm, with a few tall and half-grown children. War was just a word in the newspapers, a distant event, which had nothing to do with my life. But suddenly, the word became reality. The order for general mobilization. All the men of the village, from the newly grown youth to the experienced old men, had to go. My father, who had fought in the War of 1870, looked at me with a sad look. "My son, be brave. Fight for France." My mother was crying. Marie, with tearful eyes, held my hand tightly. "Come back, André. Come back to me." I promised. I promised with all my heart. We got on the train. A train full of young men, in blue uniforms and hats that were too big for us. Everyone was excited. They thought it would be a short adventure. "We'll be back by Christmas." That's what everyone was saying. We were laughing, we were singing. We didn't know what the hell we were going to be in for. We didn't know we were going to spend many Christmases in the ditches. The first time I smelled gunpowder was in Belgium. The sharp, bitter smell of death. The first time I heard the whistle of a bullet whizzing past my head, my body froze. And the first time I saw one of my friends, Jacques, who had been laughing with me until yesterday, fall to the ground with a bullet in his head, my whole world collapsed. There was no more adventure. There was only fear. Absolute, ruthless fear. The trenches, oh, the trenches. A word that has been etched in my mind forever. Deep, muddy holes in the ground. Full of rats, full of filth, full of the smell of death. We lived there. We slept. We ate. We fought. We spent days and nights there. The sky above us was always gray, either from gunpowder smoke or from rain clouds. The rain was the only thing that could wash away the stench a little, but it always came back. Every day, there was a charge. The commander would shout, "Forward! For France!" and we, with our bayonets, would leap out of the trenches, towards the barbed wire, towards the enemy's machine guns, like sheep going to the slaughter. We knew that many of us would never return, but there was no choice. Fear drove us forward. Loyalty drove us forward. And sometimes, just hoping that this nightmare would end. Mustard gas, that was another tool of the devil. It smelled like garlic, or mustard, but when it got to your lungs, it burned like acid. I saw how men were suffocating from it. Their eyes burned. Their skin blistered. Gas masks were our only defense. But sometimes, the masks had holes, or they arrived too late. It was hard to breathe with the mask on, but without it, death was certain. The nights in the trench were perhaps the worst. The darkness magnified the fears. The sound of rats moving in the mud, the groans of the wounded that no one could reach, and worst of all, the silence. A silence that could be broken at any moment by the sound of a sniper's shot or the explosion of a mortar. I read Marie's letters. She wrote from the village, about how she was running the farm, about how much she missed me. Every word of hers was like a ray of light in that absolute darkness. I always kept her photo in my shirt pocket, close to my heart. The food was often cold and tasteless. Dry bread, thin soup. But we ate, because we had to survive. Water was always scarce and dirty. Diseases were rampant. Fever, diarrhea, infections. There were few doctors and even less medicine. I saw men die, not from bullets, but from a small wound that had become infected. This was the cruelty of war. Not just killing, but slow, painful torment. Christmas 1914, a small miracle happened. On a section of the front line, the Germans began to sing. We answered. Then one of them, with a white flag, emerged from the trench. We sent one too. For a few hours, the fighting stopped. We smoked cigarettes together, exchanged chocolates. We showed each other photos of our families. We saw that they were tired and homesick men, just like us. With the same fears, with the same hopes. For a moment, humanity overcame the madness of war. But then, the commanders ordered the ceasefire to end. And we became enemies again. At that moment, my heart was squeezed with deep sorrow. How could we have done this? the Battle of Verdun. Ah, Verdun. A word forever associated with blood and death. We fought there for 9 months. 9 months of hell. The ground was a quagmire of mud and blood. The trees were nothing but their dried trunks. Nothing was left alive. Millions of cannonballs were fired. Each explosion shook the ground. Our ears were deafened by the constant sound of artillery. We felt as if we were sinking into the depths of the earth. I saw my friends fall one after the other. Lucas, who always joked, with a bullet in his chest. Pierre, who was always calm, under the rubble of a trench. Every time someone fell, a part of my soul died with them. We had become ghosts moving in the mud. Our faces looked older than our years with fatigue and fear. We didn't even cry anymore. We just kept going. We either died, or we lived to fight again. Writing letters to Marie had become difficult. How could I write to her from this hell? How could I say that I see death with my own eyes every day? I would just write that I was fine and I'll be back soon. White lies. Lies that were necessary to keep my hope alive, and hers. But I knew that she was worried too. She knew that war was cruel. Her letters were my only connection to the real world. A world I could barely remember anymore. One day, during another attack, a mortar shell exploded near me. I was thrown into the air. When I fell to the ground, I felt like my whole body was paralyzed. Blood, there was blood everywhere. My right leg, I couldn't feel it anymore. The pain was terrible. But at that moment, I also felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe this was the end. Maybe I wouldn't have to fight anymore. I was taken to a field hospital. A dirty tent full of wounded. The smell of blood and infection. Tired doctors and kind nurses. They amputated my leg. When I regained consciousness, the first thing I saw was the face of a young nurse. Her eyes were full of fatigue, but she had an encouraging smile. "Calm down, soldier. You will survive. I will survive." These words fell on me like a sledgehammer. I will survive. But how? Without a leg? I was no longer that farmer André. I could no longer work in the field. I could no longer dance with a snake. The future I had imagined for myself had vanished in an instant. The days passed in the hospital. Days full of pain, full of dark thoughts. I thought of my friends still fighting in the trenches. I thought of Jack who fell at Verdun. I thought of Pierre who would never return home. I felt guilty that I had survived, while they, why me? Why not them? The question ate at my soul like a gnat. The nurses tried to lift our spirits. They read to us, they talked to us. But sadness, like a heavy shadow, hung over everything. I wrote a letter to Marie. This time, I couldn't lie. I told him what had happened. I said I was no longer the same André I used to be. I said he had the right to leave me. I didn't want to be a burden on him. I didn't want to condemn him to an incomplete life. With every word I wrote, tears fell on the paper. It was the hardest letter I had ever written. A few weeks later, while I was still recovering, a letter arrived from Marie. My hands were shaking as I opened it. I was afraid. I was afraid that she had abandoned me too. But her words were like water of life. "My dear André, you will always be my André. With or without one leg. My love for you has not changed. I am waiting for you. Come home." My heart pounded in my chest. My tears were of joy this time. Marie, my Marie. They transferred me to a hospital in Paris. A bigger, better equipped hospital. It was there that I was able to talk to other wounded soldiers. Men who had lost their arms, their eyes, or, like me, their legs. We told our stories together. We laughed, we cried. I realized that I was not alone. I realized that we all have wounds. Physical and emotional wounds. But together, we could heal them. In Paris, I met a man named Gabriel. He had also lost a leg, but he had a wonderful spirit. He was always smiling and joking. "André, now we can compete in the one-legged competition." He encouraged me to look to the future. He taught me that disability is not the end of life. It is another beginning. It was with him that I began to learn to walk with an artificial leg. It was painful, but every step was a victory. A small victory over war. The news of the Russian Revolution came. Then, America entered the war. Everything was changing. But for us in the hospital, this news was far away. We just wanted the war to be over. We wanted to go back to our homes, to our families, to our lives. But we knew that our lives would never be the same again. The day I was discharged from the hospital, it was cold, but sunny. Marie was waiting for me at the train station, with the same golden hair and blue eyes. When she saw me, she ran to me. She hugged me, tight, tight. It was as if she wanted to cover all my wounds with her love. I didn't cry anymore. I just felt alive again. Alive, but different. Returning to the village was hard. Everything had changed, and yet nothing. The farm was still the same, the houses the same, but the people had changed. Their looks were sometimes curious, sometimes compassionate. I was no longer the strong, young André who worked in the field with a shovel. Now I was a man with an artificial leg, with scars that were etched not only on my body but also in my soul. The village children looked at my artificial leg with curiosity. They asked questions. I tried to answer with a smile, but sometimes their looks pierced my heart like daggers. Mary was my guiding star. She never let me feel weak. She encouraged me to start working on the farm again, in my own way. With her help and my father's, I learned how to move around the farm with my prosthetic leg. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise. I was in pain, but every time the sun rose and lit up the field, a sense of hope came alive in my heart. The smell of the soil, the smell of wheat, had meaning to me again. But at night the nightmares came. The sound of artillery, the screams of the wounded, the smell of mustard gas. I would wake up, in a cold sweat. Marie was next to me. She would hold me and whisper, "It's over, André. It's over." She was the only one who could calm me down. She pulled me out of the darkness again and again, with patience and love. We had children. A son, Lucas, in memory of my friend who had fallen at Verdun, and a daughter, Jeanette. Seeing them filled my life with meaning again. I told them stories of the war, but not in gruesome detail. I told them of the bravery of men, of friendships, and of the value of peace. I taught them that they should never forget the war, but that they should always look to the future and strive to build a better world. Years passed. The scars on my body healed, but the scars on my soul never fully healed. They were always there, reminders of the past. Reminders of those 4 years of hell. But now, they no longer controlled me. I had taken control of them. I had become a stronger, more patient, and more grateful man. Grateful for every sunrise, every child's laughter, every moment of peace. Every year, on November 11th, Armistice Day, I remembered my friends. I went to the village cemetery. I sat by the gravestones of Lucas and Pierre. I brought them flowers. I talked to them. I told them how life had gone on. I told them how France was standing on its feet again. I told them that I would never forget them. Their sacrifice was not in vain. Sometimes, we old men of the war would gather in the village cafe. We would drink coffee together and tell our stories. Stories that no one else could understand. Just us, who had experienced that hell. We would laugh, we would cry, and in silence, we would respect each other. We were survivors. Survivors of a lost generation. My artificial leg had become a part of me. I worked with it, I walked with it, I even played with my grandchildren. It was a symbol of what I had lost, but at the same time, a symbol of human resilience and adaptability. I was proud of it. I was proud of every step I took with it. The post-war world was a different world. People wanted to forget the past. They wanted to look to the future. But I knew that forgetting was never the answer. We had to learn. We had to learn from our mistakes. We had to teach the next generations that peace was a precious gift that had to be protected. That's why, in addition to working on the farm, I started working with the Veterans Association. I went to schools and spoke to children. I spoke of the war, but more than that, of the importance of friendship, of the importance of mutual understanding, and of how violence only brings destruction. I saw how Europe was being rebuilt. Destroyed cities were rising again. People were rebuilding their lives with hope. It reminded me of the power of man to rebuild, the power of man to overcome darkness. France, my country, was flourishing again, and I was part of this rebuilding. Even with one leg, I felt useful. I felt that I could still make a contribution. Marie and I grew old together. Her hair turned white, but her blue eyes still sparkled. She was always by my side, in all the hardships and the joys. She was not only my wife, but my best friend. Someone who understood me, without the need for words. The one who saw my hidden wounds and healed them with his love. He was my true hero. Lucas and Jeanette grew up. Lucas became an engineer and helped rebuild the country's infrastructure. Jeanette became a teacher and taught children about peace and humanity. Seeing them succeed was the greatest reward for me. They were a new generation growing up in a different world. A world we had fought for. A world we hoped would be better than ours. But sometimes, the shadow of war would come back. In the late 1930s, when news came from Germany, news of a new dictator, of hateful slogans, my heart would tighten. Was history repeating itself? Had all the sacrifices, all the blood, been in vain? We would talk to old friends in the cafe. There was concern in all of our eyes. Not this time, we would say. We must not let it happen this time. But we knew that a force greater than ourselves was forming. It was painful for me to see my son Lucas, now a grown and responsible man himself, listening to the news with concern. I didn't want him to have to experience war. I didn't want his generation to see that hell. I told him, my son, always be vigilant. Always defend peace. But if you ever have to fight, fight bravely. But never let hatred enter your heart. This was the most important lesson the war had taught me. In 1939, World War II began. I couldn't believe it. The whole world was burning again. This time, not in the trenches, but in the sky, in the cities. Bombs were falling on London, on Paris, on all of Europe. I felt helpless. I couldn't fight anymore. But I could do something else. I could help the resistance. We reunited with my old friends who were still alive. We were no longer frontline soldiers, but our experience was valuable. We helped the youth of the resistance. We gathered intelligence. We provided shelter for Jews and downed pilots. Even with my artificial leg, I tried to be useful. I did whatever little thing I could to free my country. This time, the war was different. More terrible. Faster. But the spirit of resistance in the French people was stronger than ever. I saw how ordinary people, with courage and sacrifice, stood up to the occupiers. Young men and women faced great dangers to deliver messages, smuggle weapons, or save the lives of refugees. I was proud of them. They were a new generation of heroes, heroes who fought not in the trenches but on the streets of the cities and in their homes. Marie and I had turned our little house in the village into a temporary shelter. Sometimes downed Allied pilots would spend the night with us. Sometimes Jewish families escaping the Nazis. Marie kindly cooked for them and we tried to talk to them, to give them hope. The fear was always there. We knew what fate awaited us if we were discovered, but we couldn't sit idly by. We had a duty. Lucas, my son, was also active in the resistance. He worked in an underground network in Paris. Every time he came to see us, my heart would tighten with worry. I was afraid that something bad would happen to him. Like me, he experienced the wounds of war, but of a different kind. Hidden wounds, wounds of fear and danger. But like me, he knew that he had to fight. For freedom, for the future of his children. The years of occupation were hard years. Food shortages, fuel shortages, the constant fear of arrest. But the French people never lost hope. The resistance, like a fire under the ashes, was always burning. I saw how neighbors helped each other, how they shared food and information. This unity, this solidarity, was the most beautiful thing I saw in those dark years. One day, the news came that the Allied forces had landed in Normandy. The whole village jumped for joy. We were crying, we were hugging each other. This was the beginning of the end of the nightmare of the occupation. But we knew that there was still a long way to go. There was still fighting, there was still sacrifice to be made. Paris was liberated. The day of the liberation of Paris was one of the most memorable days of my life. Marie and I, with my prosthetic leg, took to the streets. People were dancing, singing. French flags were flying everywhere. Seeing General de Gaulle, seeing Allied soldiers, brought tears of joy to my eyes. I felt that all the years of pain and suffering had finally paid off. France was liberated. After the liberation, it was time to rebuild again. This time, not just to rebuild the cities, but to rebuild the people's spirit. The wounds of World War II were even deeper than those of the First. But the French people, with the same determination and strength, began to rebuild again. Lucas and Jean played an important role in this reconstruction. They were building the future of France. Marie and I spent our old age on the farm in relative peace. Our grandchildren were around us. I told them stories of both wars, of the horrors, of the bravery, and of the importance of peace. I wanted them to know that freedom doesn't come easy. I wanted them to know that they must always be careful not to repeat history. My prosthetic leg had become a part of me. I had lived with it. I had fought with it. I had farmed with it. It was a reminder of everything I had been through. A reminder of how strong a person can be. How resilient they can be in the face of adversity. With each passing year, my old friends became fewer and fewer. We were the survivors of a generation that had seen 2 world wars. At the commemorations, our numbers grew smaller every year, but their memory was alive in my heart. The older I got, the more I thought about the past. Of that young, inexperienced boy who had gone to war with enthusiasm, and of the old man who now lived with his wounds. Life was a long journey, full of ups and downs, full of joys and sorrows. Marie, the love of my life, finally passed away. My heart was broken. She was my rock of patience, the light of my life. Without her, the world seemed dark to me, but I knew she didn't want me to be sad. She always wanted me to be strong, to go on living. My children and grandchildren were by my side, and their love was a balm to my wounds. But the void Marie left was never filled. Now, in this old age, I often sat on my porch and looked out at the farm. The farm that had been in our family for generations. The farm that had seen my whole life. The oak trees that had been planted when I was young were now tall and strong. They had seen the passage of time, like me, the changes of the world. But their roots were firmly in the soil, like the roots of our family, like the roots of France. My grandchildren would gather around me and ask me to tell them war stories. I would tell them patiently. About the trenches, about my friends, about Mary, about the hardships and about hope. About how even in the darkest moments, the light of hope is always there. I would teach them to appreciate peace, to appreciate life, to appreciate family. I wanted them to know that every moment of life is a gift. The world had changed a lot. Cars had become faster, planes were flying higher, people were living faster. But the basic values, for me, remained the same. Love, family, peace, freedom. These were the things I had fought for, I had lived for. My prosthetic leg was worn out now, but I still walked with it. Every step was a reminder of a memory, a reminder of a lesson, a reminder of everything that had brought me here. It was part of my story. A story of survival, a story of resistance, a story of love. Sometimes I thought about the future. The world my grandchildren would live in. Would peace last? Would people learn from the mistakes of the past? I hoped it would. I hoped that our efforts had not been in vain. I hoped that future generations would live in a better world. I watched the sunset slowly sink behind the hills. Oranges and purples painted the sky. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Life, even with all its hardships, was still beautiful, and I was grateful for every moment of it. Every moment of this life was a gift. I remembered Gabriel's words, André, now we can compete in the one-legged races. A smile spread across my face. He was right. Life, even with its flaws, with its limitations, still went on, and I had tried my best to live it to the fullest. Now it was my turn to find peace. I had told my whole story. I had learned all my lessons. I had left a legacy of love, resilience, and hope for my children and grandchildren. And that was enough for me. But life always had its surprises. One morning, as I sat on the porch as usual, looking out over the fields, Lucas came rushing toward me, carrying an old, dusty package in his hand. Dad, I found this in the basement. I think it's yours. Tears welled up in my eyes as I opened the package. Inside was my old uniform. The same one I had worn in World War I. A rusty helmet and a small, worn, tattered notebook. The diary I had written in the trenches, but I thought I had lost. With trembling hands, I opened the notebook. Illegal lines, covered in dirt and blood. Words I had written years ago, in the height of terror and despair. Jack fell today. The smell of death is everywhere. Will this hell ever end? Reading those words threw me back in time. To those dark days, to those moments of utter despair. But alongside them were words of hope. Marie, my love. If I live, I promise you to live life to the fullest. Lucas sat down next to me and looked at the notebook. Father, how hard you have been. I shook my head. We all have been, my son. But what matters is how we got out of it. What matters is how we continue to live. I told him that this notebook was not just a reminder of the past. It was a reminder of the human power to resist. Lucas suggested that we publish these memories in a book. At first I was hesitant. I didn't want to relieve all that pain. But then I thought, maybe this is a way for our voices, the voices of the survivors, to reach future generations. Maybe this is a way for them to learn from our mistakes, to know how precious peace is. So we started. Lucas would help me put my memories into words. He would ask questions, and I would answer. Sometimes we would talk for hours. Every word, every sentence, would take me back in time. To the trenches, to the hospital, to the farm with Mary. It was both painful and healing. It was like reopening old wounds, but this time, with the goal of full recovery. In the process, I discovered new things about myself. Strengths I didn't think I had. Courage I had shown in my darkest moments. And a love that had survived even through the devastation of war. This notebook was not just a historical document, but a document of the human spirit. One day, while we were rewriting one of the chapters, my daughter, Jeanette, came to the farm with my grandchildren. They gathered around the table and looked at the notebook and the manuscripts with curiosity. "Grandpa, what is this?" one of my grandchildren asked. I smiled. "This is the story of Grandpa's life, my son. A story of war and peace. A story I want you to know." They listened with curious eyes as I read them parts of my memoir. I saw their eyes fill with horror and excitement. I saw them begin to understand. That was very important to me. That they could connect with their own history through my story. With every word we wrote, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. These memories were no longer just mine. They were now part of history, part of a legacy I was leaving for future generations. The book was a big deal. There was a small launch party in the village library. My whole family was there, my old friends, and even some of the young people in the village who were curious to hear my stories. When Lucas handed me the book, I had a strange feeling. It wasn't just a book, it was my whole life written down in words. On the cover was a photo of me as a young man in a military uniform, and next to it, a photo of me as an old man on a farm. A symbol of the two halves of my life. A symbol of the transition from war to peace. It was very encouraging to read the positive reviews of the book. People wrote about how my story had touched them, how it gave them a new perspective on war and peace. That was the most important thing for me, to be able to convey a message of hope and resistance. Now, I was no longer just an old farmer, but also a writer. Of course, a writer who had written only one book, but that one book had given me a new sense of purpose. I felt like I had done my duty to my lost friends, to my family, to future generations. Sometimes, I would look at the letters I received from readers. Letters from all over France, even from other countries. People would write how my story had made them think, how it had helped them to come to terms with their own wounds. That was very valuable to me. Knowing that my story could help others. With each passing year, I realized more and more the importance of telling stories. Stories are a bridge between generations. They help us understand the past, and use it to build a better future. My legacy was not just my farm and my family, but this story. The story of an ordinary soldier who found a way to live in the midst of the hell of war. Now, at this very old age, my memory sometimes faded. But the memories of the war never left me. They were like a shadow that was always with me. But they no longer scared me. They had become a part of me. A part of who I was. It was a joy to see my grandchildren, now grown up and reading to me. They were now reading my story in my own words. And that was very important to me. That they would know where their roots came from. That they would know what sacrifices had been made for their freedom. Every morning, when the sun rose over the hills and lit up the field, I would think of Mary. Of her smile, of her blue eyes. She had always been the light of my life. And now, I lived in the light that she had given me. I felt like I was nearing the end of the road. But I was not afraid. I had lived a full life. I had experienced great love. I had fought in 2 great wars and survived. And I had a story to tell that I hoped would inspire others. That was enough for me. One day, one of my grandchildren brought me a painting. A painting of a soldier with an artificial leg, standing in a field full of flowers. And next to him, a beautiful woman with a kind smile. Tears welled up in my eyes. They understood me. They understood my story. I told them, "Children, this painting of yours is the best legacy you could give me." It showed that my message had reached them. The message of peace, the message of love, the message of resistance. They had not only heard the story of the war, but they had also learned its lessons. That was the most comforting feeling in the world to me. In the last years of my life, I spent most of my time on the porch. I looked out over the farm, which was now run by Lucas and his family. It was a pleasure to see them tilling the land with the same love and commitment. They were a continuation of me, a continuation of Marie, a continuation of all the generations that had lived on this land before us. Sometimes, reporters would come to me. They wanted to talk about my book, about my memories. I would patiently answer their questions. I knew that every time I told my story, I was helping to keep the memory of the victims of war alive. And that was my duty. A reporter asked, André, if you could go back in time, would you still go to war? I paused for a moment. That's a tough question. At the time, I thought it was my duty. For my country, for freedom. But now, looking back, I know that war is always a tragedy. It always brings destruction. I hope that future generations will never have to make that choice. With each passing day, I felt my body getting weaker. But my mind was still clear. My memories were still alive. And my heart was still full of love. Love for my family, for my country, and for all that I had fought for. My grandchildren were now young people themselves. They were going to university, finding jobs. They were the future of France. And I was happy to see them living with hope and enthusiasm. They were the fruit of all our sacrifices and suffering. One evening, as I watched the sunset, one of my grandchildren sat down next to me. "Grandpa, don't you ever get tired of war?" he asked. I smiled. "War is not something to get tired of, my son. War is something to learn from. You must remember it, so that it never happens again." He took my hand. Mine was old and wrinkled, but there was still strength in it. Strength that came from years of work, years of war, and years of love. I looked at him. His eyes were full of curiosity and respect. I knew he would take my story with him. I told him, "Now it's your turn, my son. It's your turn to protect this world. It's your turn to keep the peace. It's your turn to pass on our stories to the next generation." That was the last lesson I could give him. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would look up at the stars. Stars that existed millions of years ago, and would exist millions of years from now. In comparison to their grandeur, my life was just a moment. But a moment full of meaning, full of experience. I thought of all the faces I had seen in my life. The faces of my friends in the ditches, the face of Mary, the faces of my children and grandchildren. Each one of them was a part of my story, and I was grateful to have been able to live with them. My prosthetic leg was now completely worn out, but it was still a symbol of resilience. A symbol of how, even with flaws, you can live life to the fullest. It was a reminder of how strong a person can be. With every sunrise and sunset, I felt my connection to this farm, to this soil, deepen. Every bit of this land was tinged with the sweat of my brow and that of my father's. Every tree, every bush had a story to tell. This farm was not just a piece of land, it was my home, it was my history, and it was the future of my family. Sometimes, I would go back to my childhood memories. To the time when Mary and I played on this farm, unaware of the wars that awaited us. To the time when the world seemed simpler. But I knew that simplicity was an illusion. The world has always been complex, and humans have always had to make difficult choices. One of my grandsons, now a history student himself, would often discuss historical events with me. He wanted to know why wars happened, and whether humans could ever experience true peace. I would tell him that peace is a choice, a constant struggle. Something to be fought for, not with weapons, but with understanding and empathy. "Grandpa, you are a treasure trove of living history," he told me. I smiled. I was just a witness, my son. A witness to the bravery and folly of man. A witness to the power of love and the devastation of war. I wanted him to know that history is not just a collection of facts, but a collection of human stories. Over the years, I had received several awards and commendations for my service in the war, as well as for my book. I kept them respectfully in my room. But for me, the greatest reward was seeing my family living in peace and quiet. Seeing my grandchildren with a bright future ahead of them. Now, at this age, I was no longer able to work on the farm. But every morning, I would come out on the porch and watch Lucas and his family working. They served the land with the same passion and enthusiasm that I had as a young man. That was comforting to me. To know that my legacy would continue. Sometimes, I would look up at the sky and think of Marie. Was she watching me from above? Was she happy with me? I hoped so. I hoped that I had been able to keep the promise I had made to her in the ditches. The promise to live life to the fullest. I felt like my whole life was flowing like a long river toward the sea. A river full of twists and turns, full of storms and peace. And now, I was approaching the end of the journey. But not with fear, but with peace and contentment. One day, one of my grandchildren brought me a red rose. The same rose that Marie loved in the garden. The smell of that rose took me back in time, to sweet moments with Marie, to our eternal love. It was a symbol of beauty and permanence. A symbol of life that blooms even in the midst of hardship. With every breath I took, I felt my soul calm down. All the memories, all the lessons, all the loves, were now gathered within me, and I was ready to find peace. But still, every day was a gift. I remembered Gabriel's old words, André, we are like oak trees. The longer we live, the deeper our roots grow. He was right. My roots were deeper than ever. In this soil, in this family, in this history. I watched the sunset paint the sky with dazzling colors. It was beautiful. Life, even with all its scars and pain, was still beautiful. And I was grateful for every moment of it. The last rays of the sun shone on my wrinkled and tired face. A gentle smile spread across my lips. I felt my whole being filled with peace and contentment. I closed my eyes. My whole life flashed before my eyes, like a movie. From that young and passionate boy who went to war with big dreams, to this old man who was ready to say goodbye to the world with a bag of experience and love. Every moment, every memory, was precious. Every joy and every sorrow had made me who I was. I heard Marie's voice. A soft, sweet voice, calling my name. André. It was as if he were there, beside me. I felt his hand in mine. A warm, familiar hand. I smiled. I knew he was waiting for me. Waiting for us. And in the last rays of sunset, André, the old soldier, the patient farmer, the memoirist, and Marie's eternal lover, closed his eyes forever. He was no longer in pain. The wounds of war no longer troubled him. He had reached eternal peace, next to the love of his life, on the farm where he had spent his entire life. The next morning, the sun rose again. The farm shone in its usual golden glory. But one chair on the porch was empty. His family, with hearts filled with sorrow but filled with love and remembrance, gathered together. They knew that André was never truly gone. He lived on in their memories, in their stories, and in every bit of the soil. His legacy was not just his farm and his family, but a story of resistance, hope, and love. A story that will live forever in the heart of France, and in the hearts of all who heard it. A story that was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of humanity never goes out. Thank you for taking the time to listen to André's life story. This winding journey, from the trenches of World War I to the peace of a French farm, was not just a story of a life, but a reflection of the power of the human spirit to endure, love, and hope. We hope that André's story, with all its ups and downs, has been able to connect with you. Perhaps it has made you think for a moment, perhaps it has brought a smile to your face, and perhaps even a tear to your eye. Our goal was to convey a message of peace, empathy, and the importance of storytelling. Every word, every emotion, and every experience that André shared is a precious treasure trove of history and humanity. May this story be a reminder that even in the darkest times, the light of hope never fades and that love is the most powerful force in the world. Thank you so much for your support and attention.